My guest is Husayn Allmart, and he was born in Chile and has spent most of his life in the Midwestern US. He just celebrated his 20th wedding anniversary, whoop, has 3 kids and 2 bunnies. He works in fundraising and content creation. His pronouns are he, him, his. Thanks so much, Hussein, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited because you and I met years ago in the Chicago area. We worked for the same nonprofit organization. I believe that's where we met at work. I was doing my video production work. And were you at the time doing fundraising or something else?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing.
Okay. It was years ago, needless to say, but I fondly remember you meeting your wife and your oldest child now. And it was such a sweet time. I'm excited that we get to reconnect after so many years. I think it's been like, I don't know. Well, I moved away 11 years ago now. So it's been a while. Good to see you.
Oh, you too.
Yes. So I love that you're open to this and that you want to share some of your experiences around being enough or feeling like you are enough, and in the context of being a male in the world, being a white male in the world, and obviously in the context of what's going on in the US community specifically right now. So many challenges related to racial justice and just I think unity and challenges with feeling connected to people and feeling like we've got each other's back. So I wanted to talk to you. I thought you'd have a really interesting perspective on sort of in the general with the general theme of shame and this idea of people not feeling like they're enough or feeling like they can't be their best because someone might think that they're trying to outshine them or be better than them. And I just wanted to explore this. So I would love to start and hear about your experience with the myth or the challenge of having to be enough.
Yeah, yeah. That's something I'm still trying to figure out. Like, it's kind of like a lifelong struggle. I feel like it'll be. I think for like a number of different reasons. I've been thinking about this a lot, and um, I'm still trying to come to a conclusion. I don't know if I've come to a conclusion about it yet, but I feel like a big part of it is that I think capitalism, the way our economy is structured and the way it makes us think, is so closely tied with, I guess, what we call like patriarchy or toxic masculinity and racism. So, and I'm still trying to figure out like what is like just me and what is a common experience specifically to like men that look like me, because I think I can only really understand that kind of experience, like white passing men. But there is I think in general, like the way our economics is run and the way our workplaces are run is that we always have to compete and we always have to show that we're better than someone else, and we're always having to go to the next rung. And if we don't do that, then something's wrong, or we're lazy, or something's missing, or something like that. Um, so that's one thing I've been thinking about. Like one example that's kind of like stuck in my head is whenever at work there's a position above me, in terms of like hierarchy or management or something like that, that's open, the question I always get from men is, are you going to go for it? Like, a woman has never said that to me, like, oh, are you going to try to advance? Or, and I think that's really
Huh.
telling. And, and, and like, honestly, like this last time that there was a position open, in my head, I was like, it didn't feel right. Like, for two reasons. One, I don't really want to be in like a management position really. Like I have enough going on with home and the bunnies and all that stuff. So I don't really want that to do that at work, even though I feel like there's like a narrative telling me that I'm supposed to want that, to be in a position of control and
Mhm.
influence and power. But then also I feel like, coming back to like the racism part and things like that, like I feel like the way things are going to change is when people with privilege start giving up that privilege. So when like recently when a position came open, I got those questions again. Are you going to try for it? Are you going to go for it? And in my head, I was like, no. If they ask me if I'm offered or invited to apply or something like that, I'm going to say no. That I think like a woman of color should be in that position. And I think like that's when I feel like when things start to change is when we start to kind of, I guess, like rewrite that narrative and that story, that I don't have to go to the next position and I don't have to keep advancing, whatever that means. Because really that means prestige and title and money.
Mm.
Doesn't necessarily mean spiritual advancement, or I'm not advancing in my capacity to serve people, or you know, be of service to the world. It just means a title, really. So um yeah, so I don't know, I hope that answered your question. That's kind of what I've been thinking a lot about lately.
Oh, that's interesting. No, it's interesting to know what's on your mind and like what people are really contemplating, who people who are trying to be mindful and more self-aware and think about people beyond them, their immediate family and their immediate circle. And it's interesting to me to think about giving up, I guess, quote unquote, that privilege or power, especially from a man's standpoint, because I think that's at the root of a lot of challenges right now in our society is this power or perceived power and the threat of that being taken away and what that would do for someone's life or what that would mean to them. But so you've given some examples of the way you may think through a situation where you're handed or you're being considered or you're even offered a potential opportunity to advance, and in your mind you would maybe reconsider that or think about who else might benefit from that opportunity. But for people who and I guess for men who see that as a sign of like weakness or giving up, what's really going on there? I mean, in your mind, like what why is it so hard for so many people and maybe for men in particular to kind of slow things down, maybe not feel like they have to climb that ladder so fast? Like, is it about self-worth or I yeah, what why is it so hard? Because it doesn't seem like it's easy for people to let that go at all.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Like the perceived threat of a loss or change is just as powerful as like an actual threat to, you know, perceived change. And it feels like
Mhm.
white men in particular, um this perceived threat, something I see on like social media a lot is white men will say like, "Oh, I can't say anything anymore." Like I don't know what to
Oh.
say. People are going to jump all over me, and I don't know what to say anymore.
Hmm.
And I feel like what's happening there is that really what's happening is they're facing consequences in a way that like white men haven't faced in like 2 or 3 or 400 years. Like facing the consequences of their actions and their words, and then they feel like they can't do anything. It's so I think that's
Hmm.
very telling. Is it's kind of what they're saying is I don't this way of being in the world is changing, and I don't know how to change with it.
It feels like a win-lose to them, like or a lose-lose, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. Um,
I know you've studied and really looked at this idea of healthy masculinity and toxic masculinity. How does that play a role in this challenge, the struggle for possibly not wanting to quote unquote give up their power when maybe it's not really about losing power, but yeah, what is that masculinity and the toxicity of versus healthy masculinity? How do those balance, or which one is which one is kind of predominant right now?
yeah, I guess there's two parts to that I've been thinking about. One is I think kind of what's at the bottom of toxic masculinity or patriarchy is like control. I think that's a big part of it, and it almost feels like a drug. Like men, I think we're taught and we're comfortable when we feel like we're in control of the people around us, the conversations around us, the emotions around us. When we're in control of our own emotions, that's or we can express our emotions or anger, but it's received and not challenged. I think that's when men feel most comfortable. Like I think like white passing men, and I think that carries out in home life and in professional life, just like in public. It's like it's like a drug that like it's almost like we have to be in control of everything, and if we're not in control, then everything is chaos. Like I think like everything feels like chaos, and I feel like I could see that now like play out nationally. Like um, with people of color protesting and rallying for racial justice, the narrative is that our cities are out of control. Like because
Mm.
white men aren't in control. That's how I read the
Mm.
situation. And
And is that's and that's the toxicity?
I think
That's
so,
like
that
it
we have to
results
be
in
in
toxicity? Is
that,
that
yeah, that like we have to be in control, and we have to be kind of dominating. We have to control the conversation, and we have to dominate it. And one of the places I see that very clearly, aside from social media and like what's happening in like national politics, is that in any activist circle I've been in, whether it's like religious or non-religious or local or more national, there I can really only think of one other white man that's been in those circles that I've seen. Like it's all completely like women of color, or trans women, which is interesting. So, and I think one of the things that clicked for me was that I realized that as a man, I'm told that my value is tied to like how much I can control or influence the world around me. Kind of going back to that
mm,
management like thing, like you have to advance or something like that. Like we have to be in control, and that's the value. But what I'm seeing in these like activist circles that are largely like it's mostly women, is that my value is actually the opposite. It's how much I listen, how much I take direction from others, how much I admit I don't know, or am willing to have my worldview changed or challenged by other people's experiences and knowledge. And I think that drives away a lot of men.
hmm. Okay. Because that's just yeah, that's a very different mindset and feeling of a different feeling or values sort of system. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, talk a little bit about what that activism work is that you've been involved in. Just if you can share a little bit more, that'd be interesting to hear.
Oh yeah, so I've been involved in activist circles in my faith community, and then also where I live and work in Evanston. And it's really been like a life-changing experience for me, because I feel like I've been on a path of learning about racism and colonization and things like that for a good chunk of my life, maybe especially since, well, I think really since like what really opened my eyes to issues of racial justice and colonization, I think was when after high school I spent a year on an Indian reservation in South Dakota. So I think that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. But then I tried to continue that work in school and college and as a teacher and things like that. But I've really been involved in these activist circles for maybe like 3 or 4 years, and I feel like I've learned more in those years than like in all the previous years. Because I feel like before it was mostly book learning, we're
Hmm.
watching videos or movies or something like that. But in these past 3 or 4 years, I've been part of a group that first it started with a Facebook group that helps facilitate conversations, like anti-oppressive conversations, and then it's extended into Evanston where I live too. And then in Evanston, it's more clearly taken on like a physical component of like actually going to marches and organizing things and things like that. But being a part of these groups, I'm with Black and Native women and trans women. And so every day, whenever a conversation comes up or something happens in the news, like I get to see their thoughts on it. And, and sometimes, like, if, you know, it's like they help me understand like what's going on. Like, sometimes a conversation will spark in a group that we administer, we're an admin for, and I can tell something's off, but I can't tell quite what's off by what someone said, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's this and this and this and this," and it's like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, you know, the like hidden levels of like racism or anti-trans or anti-gay or things like that. They're just really
Mm.
opening my eyes to, and so like I really feel like I owe so much to like these women that I've been involved with and learned so much from.
That's amazing. It's like another aspect of community, of your community, and there's trust and there's rapport and there's that's what we all want. We all want to feel like we belong and that we are valued for who we are and that we don't have to change who we are in order to belong. And it's beautiful that you've been able to, you know, find find communities and find people who you connect with and can just be yourself, which then to me speaks to why for you the feeling of or the your perception of your power maybe is different than maybe another man's because you've expanded your ecosystem to include so many different peoples and perspectives, and to you that's just like normal and like the way it probably in your mind probably it's the way it should be. It's just like that's part of life. We're all here together. So I I'm so curious about this because I really wonder what it will take for kind of men writ large, kind of the masses of men, what it would take for them to feel like they can open up and expand and let other people in and not at the same time feel like they're losing any of themselves or any of their value. Seems to me that's kind of the heart of the struggle. And then of course if you've been a part of a group that's had power or perceived power for, centuries, then that makes it that much harder. Even if you have good intentions, even if you have I think so many men have good intentions and have good hearts. That's not what I worry about. I just the culture is I think the challenge that the culture of masculinity right now seems to be I don't know, maybe stuck or just in a place where it feels really hard for men to want to move forward and progress, maybe in the ways that you and I are talking about today. And surely women have as like a kind of a culture, women have their own kind of challenges right now. The feminine culture, I think, is in an interesting place of trying to like equality is so much the goal, but equality in so many different ways. I find that interesting that it feels like we're kind of going backward. We're kind of going about obtaining equality backwards. It's like we're fighting for equal pay and equal rights at work or yeah, the ability to be promoted and to be taken seriously and to be seen as intelligent. But it's like we're fighting for that through maybe as an example, equal pay. But it's like I wish we didn't have to go that way. I wish that we could get to a place of equality and then men and everybody are just like of course we're going to pay you equally, like where it comes from a much more organic, like real meaningful kind of consciousness, or just more of a conscious place, as opposed to having to fight for it. I'm not saying I think the fight should stop. I'm just saying I wish we didn't have to go about it this way. It just seems a little backwards. It's like when you love somebody, when you make friends with someone, or a neighbor, or you connect, you just you want to do right by that person, and you want to see them be happy, and you want them to get what they deserve, and it just kind of is a natural part of the process when you care about somebody, or you care about their well-being, that you'd want them, of course, to have all that they deserve. And
It seems
it's
so
so it's just
simple. It'd be
I
so
know it seems so
simple.
simple. It does, but yeah, but I guess when you start to take it out of the kind of individual micro level of life, and you start to think about like groups and thinking of the male culture, and that's like huge. The male culture is huge in the states and the world. I mean, it's and just like female culture is, it includes many people from many perspectives, but there seems to be something that, yeah, we have to get clear about in terms of what it means to be, like, I don't know if it's like going back to some sort of concept or reimagining the concept of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman in the world. I think that the views of those roles are outdated. And I'm not saying I have all of the answers for the new, what I would propose as a new way of being, but something just seems like it's holding us back here. I don't know how you feel about all that I just shared, but it's a lot.
Yeah, actually, that made me think of this. Recently, I was on a Zoom panel talking about decolonization,
Mm.
and it was interesting. So there was uh, a woman there from the Lakota Nation, or Sioux, I guess. as what's commonly known. And she shared kind of like the Lakota understanding of what decolonization means,
Hmm.
and it really blew my mind because, like, I went into this conversation. Um, Again, it was completely women of color, and I went in thinking about like what decolonization means from like I think from like a real like intellectual standpoint, like trying to understand it and what it means, like how to decolonize and things like that. But then this woman shared the Lakota view of decolonization, and the word for Lakota word for decolonization means to become human again. So the idea is that we're connected to the creator, like everyone is connected to the creator and like the source of life and everything, like through the top of their head. So that like what the conception is that there's something blocking that. The colonization means that you've lost contact with your creator, and through that you've lost contact with everything around you. Like you're no longer a good relative to the people around you, to your family, to the earth, to all these things. So decolonization means like uncovering that and becoming a good relative again.
Ah.
And so I thought it was so interesting because
Hmm.
I mean that is a rational like way to look at it, but it's also like heart and spirit centered. And I feel like that's where we need to go. And and then it's interesting like so at least like right now I'm in a place where I don't really want to read anything
Oh,
by a white guy or
yeah.
like or like, like if they're not if they don't have a perspective that's like informed from that perspective, or I don't know, like I don't really want to I don't want to hear it because like I've heard that.
You've
I've
already
heard
heard
it.
that perspective.
Yeah, and
You already heard it.
that's what's gotten us here. Is that
Yeah,
perspective. And I think about
right.
that quote about like from Audre Lorde about the master's tools will never help us
Mm.
deconstruct it, unbuild it. And I think that's part of what it means. Like I think I see a lot of like people looking for the answer in a return to like Western Enlightenment ideals, like liberalism or something like that. But I think we need a completely new system. Like maybe it has parts of that. I don't know. From the perspective I see and what I read from like authors of color, it's a completely different worldview and relationship to everything around us. So it's like that's where I think the medicine is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well put. And I think there are, because I've come across some white men who are more of that ilk that you're describing that you're looking for. They just may not be mainstream right now, but they're out there, and of course, it's so much about. In my mind, it's so much about like motives and intentions and your heart. Like if you have pure motives and pure intentions, and you just maybe are working with an outdated concept, then that's okay. Then no worries. Like open your mind and maybe take in some new information, a new update, and it won't be that hard to move forward. But I think for the people, especially men who have some hidden agendas, or have some motives that maybe aren't so pure, then it's a much harder place to move away from. And it's I love the Lakota, the concept of decolonization. That's really powerful. I And there is something, what you said about we need to get to the heart and spirit center. I think that is, if we looked at human evolution, we could think of like our first place where we start. Maybe, yes, where we start in like thinking about time, but also just in kind of human development, but collectively is we start it in survival mode.
Mm,
So everything is about just trying to live, eat, make it through not get killed by bears and, yeah, anything that's threatening us. If we can do that and we can keep our families intact, and if other families can keep their families intact, then we've got a little community. We're moving forward together. Then the next phase would be more of the intellectual realm, everything that comes with thoughts and intellect. That's where you look at organization, logical linear thinking, amassing resources. That's where you have diplomacy, and so governance would be a part of that. That makes sense that would be the next stage or phase of development collectively after we've made it we figured out how to survive. We've got those instincts on lock. And then the next would be, well, let's start to like build communities, build, and like create some sort of like structure, hierarchy or governance so we can keep order. And that makes sense, right? But you wouldn't end there. Ideally, you would sort of instinctively or just sort of, I guess, naturally in the progress of evolution, we collectively would then go to emotional
Mm.
intelligence, right? Where we know how to connect, we know how to care for each other, we care about relationships, we care about people's well being. And that's where, like, your brotherly, your sisterly, motherly, that idea of caring, and understanding what that emotional intelligence, that understanding what people go through, what they feel in situations, you start to understand, oh, okay, when someone's doing this or responding this way, then I know it's time to do this for them, or connect with them in this way, right? And then once you've kind of mastered or really gotten good at the emotional intelligence and that kind of heart of life, then you would naturally move on to spirit, where you are looking at the world from the way that the indigenous populations do. They see the earth as this incredible resource, and it's like a given, it's like there's a mutuality, there's a reciprocity in terms of what the earth gives and what we kind of give back to the earth. And we can use nature to sort of understand the complexities of life. In my mind, and this isn't not something I've made up. This is actually based on a model that I'm familiar with, the oneness model. Our friend Julie Walker created that model, but it would be something that would be kind of a natural evolution, this like collective development. But in my mind, where we are is we're at that second stage, which is like the intellect and thoughts. Like that's where we're at, and that's where we're kind of, in my humble opinion, stuck. If you've amassed resources and you've built civilized like societies, and you or civilizations too, and you've got order, and you know how to kind of figure out yeah, all the things that are involved with like day-to-day life and running communities, then why would you want to move forward? As far as people are concerned, we've got it covered. That's all we need to do. This is where the buck stops, right? I mean, I get it on some level, and especially if you're talking about from a male perspective, I can understand why many men may not see the need or the value to kind of go beyond that stage of evolution, because emotional intelligence, yeah, maybe that'll help with some of my like business, or but is it that critical? Like if I've got a position, if I've got my power, if I have money, right, and my family's taken care of, why would you think you need to move forward and kind of evolve to another stage? I get that. That, I mean, that's just one. This is a model. It's one way of looking at it. But to me, that kind of, it really helps me understand why maybe we are struggling, because also in that culture of the intellect. Sorry, I know I've kind of taken this to a different place, but thanks for hanging in there with me. That culture of the intellect is the downside of it's a beautiful thing. I'm not suggesting there's nothing negative about that, because we've got to kind of collectively gather ourselves and create order and organization. But the downside of that culture is that that's where rigidity comes in, that's where entitlement comes in, that's where control comes in, what you were talking about earlier. So it's an interesting way of looking at and analyzing where we're at. But I think that's part of it, is that because men have been a part of kind of moving us forward as a civilization, um, getting us kind of organized, then it makes sense that maybe they wouldn't necessarily feel the need to kind of go beyond where we're at. But if we want to evolve, if we want to take our civilization to, like you said, a place where heart and spirit and real connection, real like sense of community and belonging exists, we're going to have to move forward in new ways. It's hard. And I don't think it would happen in like 20 years. I think it's for a civilization to evolve, it takes time, but it'd be interesting. It's interesting. You're starting to see little glimmers of that, right? People in like workplaces are now, it's okay to like talk about emotional intelligence, and it's seen as something that's of value, because you've got to understand how to connect with people, especially, people kind of tie in their bottom line to that. But when it comes to business, it's interesting. We're sort of like feeling around for what would be kind of the next stage of our evolution collectively. But I also understand why we're like grounded and halting in this stage. So anyways, thanks for letting me kind of explore that
No,
out loud, because again, it's just a model that I'm familiar with that really I think is a helpful reflection. But I think it also speaks to a lot of what you said in terms of the challenges and what we might need.
yeah. Actually, just at work this week, we have been looking into the idea of professionalism and what that means and where it came from. And it was really interesting because our office is pretty diverse, like racially in terms of gender, also, and nationality. So we talked about it, and uh, so I facilitated the conversation. So I asked everybody to define professional and what it means, and then where that came from.
Mm.
So everyone, it's funny because I think that's often a phrase we hear, like, "Oh, they're not very professional" or something like that. But we has anyone ever told us what professional means? It's like something that's just in the air that we kind of piece together. I think the
Yes.
the definition that we all kind of individually coalesced around is that it's a very non-emotional space that's formal, where physical comfort is not prized at all or valued, and it's primarily just, this is how we get work done, is we don't have emotions, we don't, we're just, our minds are working on a problem. That's kind of
Mhm.
professional. And then we wear a tie,
Mhm.
or or
Yeah. Some suitor, yeah.
and then when we talked about where that came from, and it's really like, I mean, as far as we can determine, it's really from white men creating corporations, deciding this is how we make money and this is what I'm comfortable with. I don't want
Mhm.
emotions because that gets in the way of making money. We just need to figure out the best way to make money, you know?
Right.
So then now when we have an office space that's mostly not men and people of color, then it's like, okay, well, what does professional mean then? Does it mean we still have to wear a tie?
Mm.
Why do we have to just sit in a chair and type for 8 hours? Like, it's interesting. And so we're trying to figure out, like, what does that look like in our office now? Like, how do we take the racism out of it and bring back emotion and make it so we can show up as full people that get angry about things, are sad about things, that maybe come to work, thinking about a conversation that we had last night with a significant other that's bothering us. And isn't that professional? I don't,
Oh. Oh.
it's really interesting.
Oh, that's so interesting, Hussein. I love that. I can't wait to hear how that evolves, because I think that the kind of corporate office culture is really about leave your personal life at home, unless you have a funny story to tell about your kids at the coffee machine. I mean, there is a time and place, but it's really compartmentalized, and it really can't interfere with anything else. And I think about that with my experience with two heavy losses I experienced in 2 consecutive years, 2 deaths in my family. And these are my first heavy losses. So I had never really gone through that grieving process. And, I took some time off from work to go to funerals and to do all of the things that you do. But eventually, 5 days later, I had to go back to work, and I had to just tell people, I had to learn what grieving was all about for me.
Mm,
I've learned from TV shows and like movies and from watching other people go through this process. I sort of developed this idea of what grief means and what it means to grieve. And then I had to like really learn to put all that aside and say, well, this is no, this is my process and this is what I need. But people definitely don't want to like, they don't want you in the office if you're like going to cry, or if you're crying or you're sad, and they don't want to say anything to you to make you more upset. And it's
mm,
just this really strange atmosphere that I experienced, where people were so afraid with the first loss. They were so afraid to
mm,
talk to me. And I had to finally tell people, here's what I need from you. I need you to check in on me. Please don't leave me alone. I know you're leaving me alone because you think that you don't want to upset me, but like when you leave me alone, it makes me feel isolated and like I don't have anybody who cares. And I'm at work 8 hours a day. So um, I really need to know that I'm connected. You don't have to like hug me. You don't have to even ask me how I'm doing. You can just even send me a text, write me a little note, and just let me know you're thinking of me. That's all. That's what I had to learn. Like that's what I need to tell people because nobody has a clue in an office setting what to do. I mean, there are the exceptions where people just kind of break all those barriers because they do want to connect as a human, but as a general rule, office culture, like you said, doesn't permit us to bring in our personal life and let it seep into the environment. Just keep that to yourself. And I'm like, why would you tell a human who just lost a loved one? Why would you want someone who just lost a loved one to just keep that to themselves and just deal with it and not don't bring that over to my space? But the beautiful thing is that my team they were receptive. I think to really to and I did not hold back. I was like, here's what I need, people, and stop doing this, please. And they were really open, was what I love. And they were, I think, really wanting to do the right thing and do right by me. So that the next time when I had the second loss the next year, that my team was like, they were on it. They understood. And again, I mean, that was what I needed. I'm not suggesting that that's what the next person needs, but I was able to like articulate what I needed. And it became okay for that to be kind of a part of our environment, at least in our like little part of the office. But woo, that was a lot of education. I had to get kind of educated about and re-educate myself about what I thought grief was and what it's supposed to look like. And then I educated people around me. But I feel like it's a win-win because that could maybe extend into, someone else's life when they're going through this. And so, yeah, that was for me the experience of like office culture is funky. I don't know. It's just weird.
And we spend so much of our life there.
We spend so much time there. I spend 8 hours. Maybe some people work part-time but still it's like it's a good part of time. It was a huge learning experience. And in some ways I hope that like I was able to maybe help change the culture even in just a small way.
What did you learn about grief, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh my gosh. When I experienced the first loss, a dear friend told me, don't, there are those like 5 stages of grief that everybody kind of knows, but what may be more helpful to you, although those 5 stages are helpful to at least understand generally what you go through. But this dear friend told me, what might be more helpful is if you look up the symptoms of grief, because there are like 40, 50, 60 kinds of different symptoms, tons of symptoms you can experience. So I found a website called, I think it's recoverfromgrief.com. And it was just a really useful tool. Oh my gosh. It was so amazing because the person who established the website was trained as I think an ICU nurse, and then they got trained as a grief counselor, and they were able to, yeah, like really just be a resource and a tool to people who are going through grief. So they created this website, just a great tool. And I will, when I post this video, I'll include the link so people can refer to that if they want. It is a great tool and resource for grief recovery. It kind of just says, look, you're going to go through a lot. You're going to go through all kinds of feelings and emotions, and just know that they're all valid. And it makes a distinction between being depressed and grieving. And while they look the same, they are not the same, which I found really interesting. So it may look like somebody's depressed when they're going through a loss and grieving, but they're actually grieving. The difference being that grief, you move through grief, like it's a natural process that you move through. You don't even have to you don't have to think about it. You just kind of naturally go through it as time moves on. And whereas depression, if it's serious, it can, be debilitating and life altering in a way where you can't function at all. So although heavy grief can feel very similar. It was an interesting learning experience. Our culture in the US definitely, that we don't really have a process. There's cultures in Africa where they have like, I think it's Ethiopia, they have like 40 days, if I'm not mistaken, excuse me if I am, 40 days of grief or something like that, where everybody knows there's a certain amount of time where people are just allowed to grieve. They don't go to work, they don't go to school or something to this effect. And so people really have a process built in place. Well, I know we've been chatting for a bit, and I really appreciate all of your thoughts and insights. Was there anything else that you wanted to offer before we wrap up?
Yeah, I thought of another. Going back to the very first question. So this whole idea of like being enough and things like that. In 2016, there was the Standing Rock prayer camps where they were resisting the. This was in North Dakota, just right next to the Standing Rock Reservation, where they were resisting the creation of a pipeline that was right next to a main water source. So they created these prayer camps. That's how the folks that referred to them. And again, it was started primarily by women, like Native women, and the idea was that actually drew from partly from the Baha'i faith. There's a early in the days of the Baha'i faith, there were times when the community was under attack, essentially, from government forces in Iran, and they would shelter themselves in different places, and but the constant was that they would always pray, like they were always praying, even as they were defending themselves. So, and this is how it was relayed to me, by I mean, I know the book. It's from the book called The Dawnbreakers, which is a Baha'i history book. But the one of the people that had the very first teepee at Standing Rock based the idea was no matter what happens with security or police or anything like that, we're going to stay in prayer. And that's also like a native, orientation is to stay in prayer. So that's what they were. That's what they were, prayer camps. So, just real quickly, it started in I think April or May and lasted until about January of the following year. And it grew from literally one or two people to I think it was the second or third most populous location in North Dakota for like a couple months. Then, so when I went there in November, so about 4 years ago, actually, just about, there was they estimate around 15,000 people there. So, and this is out on the prairie. So I was only there for a couple days, doing a supply run. Like I did a GoFundMe to get food and things like that, and I rented a truck and went with my father-in-law, and we drove out there for just kind of the weekend. But it was really interesting and really like formative. I know for me, and I think for a lot of people that were there, is because it was essentially like forming a society from nothing, like literally nothing. And then all of a sudden, okay, how do we deal with food, and do we need currency, and what about when someone breaks a law, or and then also on top of that, there's a huge security force because there was a sheriff's department, and then they also hired essentially a private army. The oil company hired a private army, and then I found out later that when I was there, they actually had snipers, trained on us, and they had round the clock security flights that were, doing heat map and facial recognition stuff, and so it was pretty intense. But I mean, it was a very formative experience in a lot of ways. But one of the things that really stood out is that everyone's contribution was valued. So there was people on the front line that were getting arrested, they were getting hit with, actually that night that we were there, they were getting hit with water cannons and flash grenades and things like that. But there was also medics, and there was people cooking, and people building houses and sustainable toilets because they were out on the prairie and they didn't, they ran out of porta potties and things like that. So what's interesting is, so we were actually close to where all this was happening, like all the water cannon and stuff, but we didn't actually know what was going on. Like it was weird. Like people that were hundreds of miles away knew what was going on, but we were actually right next to it, sitting around a campfire, and we didn't know what was going on. I mean, we could see the flashes and things like that. Then eventually we heard ambulances and things. So, but like earlier that night, before everything went down, a guy came and invited us to his yurt, and he's like a white guy. He's interesting. He just kind of travels around the desert. He's like a handyman. He makes a little bit of money, then goes and lives in the desert basically by himself in a yurt. And then he trained with like a tea master from China. So like he said, he was explaining to us, like, we're all in his yurt, a bunch of different kinds of people, and he was talking about how during the day he builds green toilets because he has knowledge with that, how to make, compost toilets and things like that. And then at night he would share like his knowledge of tea, and he would make like delicious tea that he had learned, how to make over years and things like that. And he as far as I know, he never went to like the front line. He was never arrested by cops, he was never brutalized by police or anything like that. But it's like, the chairman of the tribe came and thanked him for what he was doing. like that was seen as valuable. And personally, like my experience was that night too. We had our boys were like 90 or maybe had just turned 1. Our twin boys had just turned 1. So my wife was like, "You need to go, and I'll figure out, how to take care of the boys while you're gone." So, but as this stuff was going on, I had this impulse, and I don't know that it was necessarily like, I don't know where it came from, but it's like I had to be on the front line. Like I had to prove myself, and I wasn't doing enough if I wasn't being hit by a water cannon or a flash grenade or something like that. Like this idea of like you're not enough. Like because what I ended up doing, kind of with the suggestion of a native elder who's kind of like my mom, is she said you came out here to do a supply drop, and you did that. Like you don't have to get arrested, and you don't have to get injured or go to the hospital to finish your job here. Like so. And it's interesting because I didn't say anything, but I think she must have picked up on some level. She's like, "You did your job. Like you're done. You don't need to get arrested, and you have to think about your kids and things like that." So she was like, "So if you feel like you need to do something, go by the sacred fire and say prayers." So that's what I did. It's kind of like I had permission to to like not go get arrested or you know hit with something. And so I did that, and I went to the sacred fire, and still this experience, like it makes me tear up when I think about it. So I was sitting there by the sacred fire, I was saying prayers for protection, because by this point ambulances were coming and everybody knew something was up. So but I was sitting there, and this young guy came and sat down next to me. I mean, there were other empty benches, but he came down and sat next to me, and he was covered in
Mm.
ice because he had been hit by a water cannon,
Oh,
and the water froze because it was like 30 degrees. The temperature was 30 degrees, and then with wind chills,
right.
probably
Ooh.
15 or 20 or something like that. So the water froze like pretty quickly. So he came and sat down next to me, and he took off his goggles and his bandana and everything because they were using tear gas. And it's like, hmm, I
Hmm.
still tear up when I think about it because he was like a young kid. He's probably 18, native, and he just looked like shell shocked. Like he couldn't
Yeah.
believe what he had just seen. And so I didn't say anything. We just sat there. I just kept praying. Boy, I really
It's
get
great.
emotional
It's
when I
powerful
talk
for
about this.
you.
Yeah, it is. So he sat there for a couple minutes, and then he said thank you to me, and then went back to the medic tent. And I was like, first I was like, what? I didn't talk with him. I didn't really do anything for him. But I think what he was doing is acknowledging that I was like holding
Hmm.
space for him in some way, to express like the shock that he had, just witnessed and experienced and things like that. So I don't know. That's really like I'm still really processing that whole experience of like what it meant to like to feel this thing where I'm not enough. I'm supposed to be doing more. Like I'm a guy. I'm supposed to be like
Hmm.
hardcore. Like that's what's going through my head. But then the people around me that are from a completely different tradition are like, yeah, go pray, sit with people. That's enough. So it's like completely different messaging and narrative, and make tea for people. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. Beautiful story, Hussein. Thank you. Because that really is an illustration of what one man was able to offer that was real and meaningful and of value and didn't require extremes, didn't require you to give up your life or sacrifice more than was necessary for fulfilling your purpose. That's really powerful. Thank you. A perfect example of, yes, what it means to be enough. And the theme that of the podcast, the idea of shine without shame is really meant to, I want to be a purveyor. I want to encourage the idea of being who you are with all your gifts and being okay with shining. And that it doesn't, we don't need to feel badly. Like we're designed individually the way we are. We're designed as humans. We have this human design. It's like, this is what we're created to do. So we shouldn't ever feel badly about being ourselves, especially ideally our best selves. And, being, I guess, of service is really what you've you've been demonstrating through your experiences and your stories. So thank you so much. It's really powerful. Oh my gosh. Come back again and I'll have your wife on and whoever, the kids, whoever wants to chat. It's really awesome. And the way I end each podcast with each guest, I ask them to share their favorite TV show or a TV show they recommend. It could be an old TV show, it could be newer, but tell us why you recommend it and what it is.
Okay. So right now I'm making my way through Lovecraft Country.
Never heard.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's on HBO. I think it just finished its first series, but it mixes kind of like the mythology of H.P. Lovecraft, which is like kind of horror, um,
Okay.
fantasy, like dark fantasy kind of stuff.
Mm.
It takes place in the 50s though, so it's about the main characters are black and they're traveling through, they're facing monsters and racism, and so it's like both of them, and it's like, okay, what's
That's
really
brilliant.
scary here? You know, like what's the more terrifying? So yeah, it's really interesting.
I don't have HBO or access to it, but I may be able to find a way. Okay. Thank you.